So we got our insects. These are the hexapods, the true insects. We talked about previously about mites and spiders and things like that. They're not considered insects. They're arthropods, but not insects. The true insects all have 6 legs. They're hexapods. Somebody brought up this whole 6-legged issue, brought up the idea, you guys know what a centaur is? It's a man's body on, chest on a horse's body. They're like, well, they've got 6 limbs, so does that make centaurs insects? No, of course not, because they don't exist. Lots and lots of different groups of insects. One are the beetles. Beetles are a subgroup of insects and probably the most widely studied and grouped, taxonomically grouped of the animals. I'm only focusing here on the bombardier beetle because I think it's neat. The bombardier beetle will shoot boiling hot acid at its foes. The way it works, you can see here, it's sort of, it can aim and then fire from underneath. You've got the bombardier beetle's carapace, and inside you have a big chamber. Off that chamber you have 2 ducts. Each are producing an enzyme, a substrate and an enzyme. These ducts are closed. When the bombardier beetle flexes its muscles, it forces the contents of these 2 chambers together, causing a chemical reaction that leads to an acid, so high pressure, acid, and heat. It will then aim its abdomen with these little plates on the bottom. And that sort of is like when you take a hose and you put your thumb over the hose, you can get to spray farther. That's what it does. It like clenches, and then this mixture fires out toward the eyes of its enemies. It's very painful. It can leave major burns on people. Hymenoptera, or ants, bees, and wasps. I'm just going through a few examples. You guys heard of killer bees? Killer bees are an organism that we can actually trace to exactly when that problem happened. And it happened starting in 1957. We'll have like a party when this hits 100 years. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Kerr, he was a biologist living in Brazil, was working to take African honeybees and European honeybees, because African honeybees could gather a lot of nectar. European honeybees could have a very high quality tasting honey. So it's like, if I cross the 2, I'm going to have a bee that gets a lot of high quality honey, right? Early biotechnology. Well, it turns out, instead what he got was a bee that made a very poor quality honey, that is very poor quality honey, didn't collect it well, and is deadly and attacks some swarms. So that was an issue. What he ended up doing was keeping the one organism that mattered was the queen. The queen's the reproductive one. So what he did was he kept the queen in the cage in the hive. And as long as the queen stayed in the hive couldn't move. Does that make sense? It can't leave the queen. So one day, he had an intern working for him. And this is one reason I don't like working with interns. He had an intern working with him. And that intern's job was to clean the hive. So put all the organisms to sleep, open up the hive, so you steam them, not steam, smoke them, and that puts the bees to sleep. Clean the honey out of the hive, and then close it back up. He used smoke, put them out, opened up the hive, cleaned it out, but forgot to lock it back up. Next day, the queen's gone. And that is the start of how, sequentially, since 1957, Africanized honeybees, the killer bee, has moved steadily from South America up through Mexico and up higher and higher into North America. The more you know. Mosquitoes. Oh, Diptera. So I'm not going to talk about flies. We'll talk about mosquitoes. You guys know mosquitoes. Have you ever felt like you were being chased by a mosquito? Like it was out to get you personally? It was. Mosquitoes can detect carbon dioxide from up to 75 feet away, and they will go to that carbon dioxide source and follow it. So if you see a mosquito and it's just hanging out by you and you move and it goes with you, it's following your breath. Mosquitoes are actually associated with more human death than any other organism on the planet because they pass on malaria. dengue fever, yellow fever, and encephalitis. Their entire, the mosquito themselves isn't deadly, it's the parasites they carry and the bacteria they carry within them. Lepidoptera are butterflies. I think butterflies are neat because their mouth parts only let them drink. They cannot chew. If it was up to me, I would live an entire life not chewing. I think chewing is a waste of my time, and I would rather just drink whatever it was. I know, blenders are great. I had a steak yesterday, and I was like, I'm chewing. You know, if I just threw this in a blender. But then it would be really messy to clean the blender, and I'm also lazy in that regard. That was the deterrent factor, yes. I don't want to clean up. Hemiptera are bedbugs and cicadas. You guys, cicadas come out in Virginia, and they were loud. They sound like some sort of like science fiction ray gun. Some species of cicada lives up to 17 years. The bulk of that, like 17 years of it, is lived underground. They crawl out, they got 2 weeks, and then they mate. Then they die. When the cicadas you see above ground like this, they don't eat. They have no mouth parts. Literally, they're living on their fats that they got when they were underground. They come out, they use all that energy to mate, and then they just die. Crickets and grasshoppers. The hotter it is, the faster crickets chirp. Back when I was teaching, this is a fun story, back when I was teaching Bio 102 at a different college, I used to have my students design their own experiments and run them because I was like, you got to learn the scientific method. It wasn't like here where it's sort of like, here's the cookie cutter, read the lab manual, do whatever the lab manual says. I was like, you guys need to design your own experiments. Well, one this kid designed, he transferred in from a very religious school. He sort of lost his sense of religion. And he's like, I'm going to prove there's no God. I was like, okay, how are you going to do this? So he said, I'm going to take crickets. I'm going to have a box of crickets that I give food to, a box of crickets I give no food to, and a box of crickets that I give no food to, but I ask people to pray for them. And I was like, I'm interested. Let's see where you're going with this. So, no, he decided not to do, it was just the two of them. He didn't even design the experiment so well. It was the crickets that got food and the crickets that got no food, but they did get prayer. So he ran this experiment for a few weeks, and he was dead set. There is no God. I'm done with this. And he presented his results, and lo and behold, what happened was the crickets who had food lived, and the crickets who didn't have food but prayers also lived. It's like, well, how did they live? Well, they lived, and he's like, well, because there's a God. Immediately, he's like, there's a God, and people prayed for him, and it worked. And he didn't think of the obvious answer, which is the scientist is not allowed to let animals die needlessly, so I had to feed them. So there we go. So when in doubt, look for the simplest solution to the lab problems, not the one that you want to see happen. Does that make sense? Odonta, dragonflies. Dragonflies eat insects. At night, just around this area, you're going to see a lot of bats in this area. You guys live around, anybody live around here? There are lots of bats. And you got several stages at night of insect eaters. The first stage, right at about sundown, a little before sundown, tons of dragonflies come out, and they're eating mosquitoes. And then the dragonflies go away, and the bats are out eating mosquitoes. That also tells you how many freaking mosquitoes there are in this area. Way too many. One dragonfly can eat up to hundreds of mosquitoes each day. Say it again? There are a bunch. Yep. Fleas. Fleas suck. Anybody ever had fleas in their house? Okay, I'll tell you, I had fleas in my house when I was younger. So with fleas, they hop on, they hop off. If you ever have had a flea on you at any point in your life, for the rest of your life, whenever there's like a slight air movement across your leg hairs or across your leg, you're like, oh my God, it's on me. Every single time. I guarantee you, rest of your life, it will scar you. Fleas are messed up. The life cycle of a flea, they're trying to jump on the host, you. They're gonna bite you on up to 400 times in one day. Each bite, they take a little bit of blood. Those females, they use blood in order to nourish their eggs, because they lay about 50 eggs per day that drop from the host into the environment. So now you've got a lot of eggs out there. About 2 weeks it takes for these eggs to hatch. Those eggs go from an egg to a larva to a nymph to an adult. Like I said, about 2 weeks to go through that whole phase. It can ingest up to about 15 times its own body weight in blood every day, and it can live for up to a year. Looking at the numbers, we did the whole math calculation with cats before, right? With cats, it was like, oh, it gets to a huge population of cats in a year. Let's talk about fleas in 2 weeks. All right, you got one flea. One stupid flea got in your house. It's a female flea, of course. It jumps on you, jumps off, lays 50 eggs in the environment. One flea. Odds of you finding one flea, pretty darn low. Next day, 50 more. Next day, 50 more. Next day, 50 more. 50 more. They start hatching. So we go 14. What's 14 times 50? Anybody? Have a calculator? 14 times 50? Oh, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you're right. 700. So we have 700. That's a weird 7. 700 eggs in the environment after 2 weeks, and you have that one female. Then they start hatching. 25 males, 25 females, roughly. So now you have 51 fleas in your environment on day 15. Day 16, you've got 101. 17, you've got 151. And you start growing bigger and bigger. But after 2 weeks of that, and you got 700, 350 of which are females, and now they're laying 50 eggs per day each, you've got an exponential growth. Very, very quickly, your house gets filled with fleas or bed bugs. They work on the same strategy. They're hard to kill because you can't just spray. If you spray, you're going to kill the adults. But what about the eggs? They hatch, they grow. 2 weeks later, you have a whole new infestation. You have to do sequential, basically sequentially timed sprays in order to get rid of fleas or bed bugs. Yeah, it sucks. You know what else is bad? Lice. Lice are wingless ectoparasites. They survive on eating the exterior of another organism. Your sebaceous secretions in your hair. Back when you were in middle school or elementary school, there's always that kid who came in and was bald one day, and you're like, oh, wonder what happened to them. Well, turns out probably lice. Things can live just about anywhere on your skin. Your skin is a phenomenal ecosystem for microorganisms and for macroorganisms like this. We talked about the parasites that can live in your right over your eyes, in your eyelashes. They're ectoparasites that eat the secretions around your eyes. If you're staring deeply into, I don't know, you're in a relationship, you're staring deeply into your partner's eyes, you just sort of glance up and the little thing's walking around. It can happen. Trust me, if you're dating somebody, look really close at their eyes and you might see something. May not, that's up to you. Isoptera are termites. Termites are kind of cool. Obviously, they destroy wood, but in their natural setting, these are termite mounds in Africa, I want to say, and they're 20 feet tall. These termite mounds have natural air conditioning in them. They're hollow tubes going up and a source of water at the bottom. So what will happen is cool air gets sucked in, blows across the water, and then goes up, so they have a constant breeze inside. So there we go. Your insects. Questions or concerns?